What is up, Dynasty fans? This is Levi, bringing you another episode of Data Driven Dynasty. Now that we are through 2 weeks of the 2025 NFL season, I thought it was time to roll out some buys and sells to play the market and improve your Dynasty teams. So without further ado, let's hop right into it. Our first buy is going to be George Pickens. Now, let's not make this too hard. Pickens is getting some of the most valuable targets in fantasy football. Through 2 weeks, he's already had 4 red zone targets, which is 4th in the league, but he's also had 2 additional deep targets that have been in the end zone or within 5 to 10 yards of the end zone. Very high probability of scoring a touchdown on those plays. And so while Pickens has only had 13 targets through the first 2 weeks, he's had 6 very, very high value targets. And this Dallas offense doesn't look like it's slowing down. The connection between Pickens and Dak is likely to only improve throughout the season, and we're likely to have some positive regression with these red zone targets and deep targets to Pickens that will lead to more touchdowns and touchdowns more consistently. That will make him have significantly more boom games than bust games, as opposed to what we saw last year with the Steelers. My first sell is actually going to be a pair of wide receivers. It's Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. Week 1, we saw what this offense's floor really was, which was abysmal, right? And week 2, I feel like we've seen the Dolphins' ceiling now. It was a high-scoring game against one of the easiest matchups offensively that they are going to face all season. And so when we take a look at the floor and the ceiling, right, Tyreek and Jalen Waddle had decent games, 17 and 18 points respectively. However, right, if this is their ceiling of players that are, supposed to be able to produce at a high level, combining that with the age, the riskiness of the situation, their head coach could be fired, it feels like, at any minute. One of the most important things is the wide receiver 1 in Miami honestly looks like it's Achane, right? It's not even one of the wide receivers. And so, honestly, moving off of either of those receivers for anyone in a close value range, I think is a real win right now. Because coming off of that good week 2, I think now is a good time to sell. People are thinking, okay, this is the Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle that we were drafting, that we wanted them to be. And I think, this is the time to get off whenever they just had a good game. It's still early in the season, and there haven't been any absolute disasters. Next up, we pivot back to a buy with Deebo Samuel. And more than the fantasy points that he has been producing over the first 2 weeks, I've just been given a lot of confidence in Deebo Samuel because we've seen him be, the old Deebo Samuel, the Deebo Samuel that we saw for years with the 49ers that scored a lot of fantasy points and was a good football player. And the fact that he is still playing to a high standard both gives me confidence in his immediate production, but also the fact that he could be a dynasty asset, a person who has value in the dynasty community and will produce for not only this year, but years to come. The second piece that I wanted to talk about is the Austin Eckler injury. And while everyone knows that Ja'Cory Crosby-Merritt is likely to benefit from the Eckler injury, I also think that Deebo could be a pretty big beneficiary as well. Eckler was taking a lot of snaps and getting a lot of targets, and I think that with him out of the offense for an extended period of time, we could see more designed runs and designed passes out of the backfield for Deebo Samuel. And so right now, while he still has some stink from the offseason, he's a little bit cheaper than he probably should be. I think now is a good time to buy in, even though we are buying high. I expect him to continue to be fantasy productive. And right now, a lot of people might be looking for a way out on Deebo because they're not confident in him and they want to sell high. But I think that you should buy high because I see his production as something that, could continue. He could be like a 14, 15 point per game wide receiver over the course of the season. And so right now, honestly, I would rather have him over guys like Jerry Jeudy, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and honestly, I'd probably rather have him over McLaurin as well. He's a little bit younger than McLaurin, and he's the one who's producing right now. And so with these older veterans, you kind of just got to take whoever's producing. So I think that you can honestly get a little bit on top of Debo for some of these guys with just how they're valued in Dynasty. And I think that that would be a huge benefit to your team, especially since Debo is likely to continue to outproduce most of these players this season. My next sell is going to be Igmeka Igbuka. And I know what you're thinking, Levi. I don't want to sell Igbuka. He's too fun to watch. He's an exciting rookie. He's gaining a ton of value. I want to ride the Igbuka train and see where it takes me. But what I'm here to tell you is that when you have those thoughts of like, I can't trade this player is too valuable, that is exactly the time when you need to be carefully examining the situation and asking yourself if you should be trading away that player. Because if you are having those thoughts that this player is indispensable, that you don't think that they're someone that you can trade, that is likely what some of the other people in your league are thinking. And if you can use that hype, the excitement around this new breaking out rookie, use it to your advantage and go and get a more secure, high value fantasy asset, that is something that is likely to benefit your team. And so if you could take Igbuka and use him with another asset, maybe a first round pick or another player, and go up and get one of those, maybe like tier 2 dynasty wide receivers like a Drake London, Brian Thomas Jr., Amon-Ra St. Brown, so a guy in that range, or even use him to tier up even higher and get like a Malik Neighbors, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase. That is the level of hype that a rookie wide receiver who's performing like Igbuka has, is that he has ascended into a range where it's reasonable that he could be a down tier target for another team who's maybe rebuilding or just really excited about Igbuka because they think that he's going to be, the next CeeDee Lamb, the next Malik Neighbors, the next Justin Jefferson. And so right now, Igbuka's value is unstable, right? If he continues to have really good games, his value is going to keep going up. But if he has, a series of, poor fantasy performances, his value is going to tank as well. And so with the amount of value that Igbuka has gained right now, if I have him on a fantasy team, I want to take that value that Igbuka has gained and just put it somewhere safer. Put it somewhere that is going to be a better long-term investment, right? I don't think that you should be selling Igbuka for anything. I think that he is a good asset to have. But if you can use him to get multiple first-round picks, use him to get like a top 18 to 24 or higher dynasty asset, I think that those are good market moves to make because it's more likely that Igbuka is going to lose value than he is to gain value right now because we have Chris Godwin coming back. We have him scoring multiple touchdowns. Mike Evans has been highly targeted but not producing. And so use the hype right now, move that value into a safer asset, and then try and buy him back later when his price dips, whenever Godwin comes back, or he has some down weeks, or he doesn't score touchdowns, right? And so just because the player's a sell doesn't mean that we're off them completely. It just means that, we see the value that they're at, and we think that they are exceeding what their reasonable value should be right now. Next up, another buy. We've got Christian Kirk. Again, this is another pretty simple buy. He's been injured so far this season. He hasn't played a snap with the Texans yet in the regular season, and so he's kind of an afterthought. People aren't thinking about Kirk, and the Texans really need him right now. If you have watched a Texans game, they are struggling both in the running game and in the passing game. And, Nico Collins is there. He's a fantastic wide receiver, but they are really missing that underneath the quick route option. Higgins and Noel, I'm not going to say they're a bust. They're either of them are a bust or anything, but right now they are not producing for the Texans. They're not producing for fantasy. Like this offense needs help, and I think Christian Kirk is exactly what this offense is looking for. And the first time that he comes out and he has a good game, this buy window is going to close because people are going to remember who he is and see that, he could be a big part of this Texans offense, a complement to Nico Collins, which I think will elevate Stroud, elevate Nico, and this offense as a whole. If they have, that short option to really open up bigger plays for Collins and plays in the rushing game. Our next sell is going to be Rome Odunze. And I know what you're thinking again, but it's the same principle as Emeka Egbuka, right? Odunze has a ton of hype right now. And what I would like to do with Rome Odunze is to channel that hype, that value into high level, more secure, more stable assets. And, Odunze and this whole Bears wide receiver room was one of the main talking points of the offseason. And so we had months and months and months to discuss this, to go around in circles. And now we come out and Odunze has had a good game and followed by a great game. And it's reassuring for Odunze. It's very exciting for the fantasy owners and people who are buying into Rome Odunze. However, one of these two games, this 2-game sample size, one of these 2 games was an absolute blowout. And I don't know if the Bears knew that it was coming and, the plan was to push the ball downfield frequently, or if just the game script drove them in that direction because, the Bears saw the Lions just crushing their defense drive after drive and figured out that if they wanted to have any chance in this game, they needed to push the ball downfield as much as they could. But I don't think that it is a good idea to try and take the Bears-Lions game, an absolute shutout, and extrapolate that out to what their offensive plan is and to what they plan on doing for the rest of the season. I mean, how much information did we get about the Denver Broncos offense whenever Miami put up 70 points on them, right? It gave us a lot of information about Miami and their potential, just like it gave us a lot of information this week about Detroit and what their offense could look like. But on the other side, right, you don't get a lot of good information, a lot of good data from an offense that is just getting absolutely blown out of the water. And so I'm less confident that this is going to be a norm and more confident that this game itself is an absolute outlier. And even week 1, we saw that whenever the Vikings made their big comeback and suddenly the Bears needed to score a touchdown in a short period of time, that they were highly targeting Odunze. And so I think that Odunze is just going to be very game script dependent. And in games where they don't have to push the ball downfield, where they're winning or it's a more neutral game script, I don't think that Odunze is going to see as high a utilization as he did in week 2. And the ADOT is also probably not going to be as high. The next problem is that Loveland and Burden, the 2 highly drafted rookies, have really not even seen the field yet. They've had very little impact thus far in the season, and this Bears offense, he does need some more playmakers out there. And based on what we've seen from Caleb Williams, he doesn't seem, right now at least, like he is going to be capable of supporting 3 to 4 fantasy producers in an offense. And so in this game against the Lions, Odunze was getting basically everything from a receiving standpoint, all of like the valuable catches, the touchdowns, and all of that. But if you take that production and you start spreading it out over more players, spread those targets out, it's going to lower his ceiling and lower his floor. And with this kind of player, a player is going to rely on making big plays and scoring touchdowns, he is going to inherently have a very low floor when those two things don't happen. And if we're just shaving targets off the top because we're bringing in other talent and other players that are going to earn targets in their own right, it's simply going to lower his floor, lower his ceiling. Um, and I think Odunze is going to be good for the rest of the season. And I believe that he could just be the outright wide receiver one, or at least 1A, 1B with DJ Moore. I just question how much the wide receiver one in Chicago is going to produce, and how much the wide receiver one in Chicago should be worth in Dynasty. And so use the hype, shift that value into a more stable asset, right? And I think that the level that Odunze has hit with this hype right now is, you could easily trade up Odunze and get, like a top 5 dynasty wide receiver. Get a Neighbors, get a CD Lamb, get a Chase, or an Amon-Ra, Puka, somebody like that. And that's just basically it's a smarter investment. It's a safer place to put your money in the short term, when in all likelihood his production is going to drop, and then his value is going to level out a little bit. My next dynasty buy is going to be Bryce Young. When we are looking at players to buy, we want to look at players whose value could increase in the short term and over the long term, right? So you don't want to be buying players generally off of big weeks when we see, oh yes, this player has produced 3 weeks in a row and we can have way more confidence in them. That's not really when you want to be making these moves to buy players, because that's when their value is hitting their peak. What you want to do is buy players whose value is going to go up. And so with the way that Bryce Young has been playing, I think that his already low price is likely even lower now, and you can get him for even cheaper. I wouldn't be surprised if there were people who would move Bryce Young for like a Geno Smith, a Matt Stafford, an Aaron Rodgers, and like a second round pick, just so that they could get some production, and get off of Bryce Young, because it's concerning. However, I've seen this movie before. We saw Bryce Young last year have a really slow start, get benched, and then come back out and look like an actual NFL quarterback. And I am willing to bet that he didn't completely forget how to play football since last year, and that he likely just needs a little bit more time, and that he still has that potential to do what he did down the stretch last year. And even if he's not showing it right now, he has that potential. Ted McMillan is only going to, gain more experience, gain more confidence, and hopefully improve as his rookie year progresses. Jalen Coker is going to be back in this offense soon. And with those two things, it's a market play. And if you can pick him up now for pennies on the dollar and then flip him whenever the time is right, even if you take a value loss on that second trade, you'll likely will come out, just push it through. You'll likely come out with a profit. And that's what Dynasty is making small value wins over and over again, and taking that, cashing it in at some point to build a team that is going to win you a championship and is going to make you money. And so I think that Bryce Young right now is just a value play. We've seen him play football. We know he can do it. And I'm willing to make the bet that he will, at some point in the season, play better football than he is right now. And I'm just trying to use that to make some money. My next sell is going to be a pair of quarterbacks in Drake May and Caleb Williams. Basically, why would we be drafting MVP level prospects when we could just be drafting MVP level talents, right? And so with Drake May and Caleb Williams, when you look at them, what we're hoping for is that they are like a Patrick Mahomes or a Justin Herbert level quarterback. And the reason that they are, valued and so highly is because they do have that little bit more upside. There's the possibility that they could break into that upper echelon, like the top four um, quarterbacks in Dynasty. And if one of them did, that would make it top five. But if we're hoping that these players reach the level of like a Patrick Mahomes or a Justin Herbert, then we're praying that they reach the level of a Josh Allen or a Lamar Jackson. And so that upside that we're chasing, just it doesn't really feel like it's being correctly weighed against the risk of these players not living up to our expectations. And as we have seen so far in this 2025 season, is that these young players, these young prospects, do not always live up to their expectations. Again, we are hoping that these young quarterbacks can become these other players that you can just have the guaranteed like 9 out of 10 instead of trying to shoot for maybe they're the 10 out of 10, right? They're the top tier. Or you could just hedge your bet, take the 9 out of 10 player instead, and be confident in the fact that they're going to retain their value. And the next buy is going to be Daniel Jones. And, I know this is another one where we are buying high, but Daniel Jones started out from such a low that even though he has gained so much value with his performances over these last 2 weeks, I still think that it's a good price for Daniel Jones. And what that price is, and again, I'm guesstimating off of, looking at trades on trade databases and such, but I think that he's worth roughly like a late projected first round pick right now, especially with all these quarterback injuries. And there's several quarterbacks that just the starting quarterbacks who just aren't really producing or we don't have much confidence in. So he has gained a significant amount of value already. And I feel pretty confident that he is going to sustain this production. And that's why I think Daniel Jones is a buy, is that I think there's a lot of people who want to, he's had these 2 good games. They're not fans of Daniel Jones. They took him really late in the draft, just, as a why not? And they want to take their money and run. And I think that's totally reasonable. But at the same time, if you need a quarterback, I think that he's a great option, and I think that he's going to continue to produce at a high level, and that he's going to have a job for the rest of the year. The big thing that I looked at that made me confident in Daniel Jones is what Gardner Minshew was able to do with this Colts team in 2023. He was able to, whenever he was starting for the majority of the game, Gardner Minshew was able to rack up a record of 9-6 with this Colts team. And like 9-6, if you play 2 more games and you have 1 win, 1 loss, that's 10-7, and that is enough to get you into the playoffs in a lot of divisions. And so Gardner Minshew really had this team looking like a playoff caliber team. And we now know, based on his performance with the Raiders in 2024, that Gardner Minshew is not him, right? And he's not like a guy who is going to continue to be a starter, as he is not a starter this year, and he did not finish 2024 as a starter. And Aiden O'Connell beat him out for the starting job towards the end of the year. So we know that it wasn't a Gardner Minshew thing. And so the only other place we can really look is that the Colts as a team are actually just pretty dang good. And so now that, they have at least someone who, while he may be one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the league in terms of pure talent as a quarterback, Daniel Jones is like a starting quarterback level player. And so when you put an actual quarterback in with a good team, they perform. The offense does well. And so I have confidence that because this offense is good, already has a good line, has good skill players in it, that Daniel Jones will continue to produce. And for that reason, I think that he is going to continue to start this year, because I think that he is just like leaps and bounds better for this team than playing Anthony Richardson. And I think that if he continues like at least 70% of what he's shown us through the first 2 weeks for the entire season, then he's going to have the first shot at like a starting role next season as well. And so not only does, his performance make me feel good about him as a producer for a competing team who needs a quarterback right now, I think that there's a chance that he could have some value heading into next year. And that is why I think, that Daniel Jones is a good buy. I think that he's a good market play, a good cheap quarterback who you can feel confident is going to produce. My last Dynasty sell is going to be another pair of wide receivers, and this time we have the Eagles wide receivers of A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. And this really pains me because these are two incredibly talented wide receivers on a very good NFL team with a good quarterback, but this is just the worst environment for a wide receiver in the entire NFL. I legitimately believe that if either of these players were on any other NFL team, whether it be like the Patriots, the Saints, whoever, they would be producing more fantasy points in any of those other situations. And really, it comes down to two things. And it's one, of course, is the target volume, is that the targets aren't there. But the second thing is that these targets are also not really downfield. They don't need to push the ball downfield very much. They're not going to be in a lot of situations where they are in close games or they're losing games and need to come back. And so, these 20 to 25 targets that the Eagles are producing each game, they also just aren't very highly, or they're not super valuable targets because, if you get 3 targets, but they're all 8 yards from the line of scrimmage, and so you have, 3 catches for 40 yards, that's not really going to make your fantasy day. Whereas, like a Jameson Williams or a Nico Collins type player who are getting some really big down the field targets, plays that could easily become touchdowns, you can survive production wise on not that many targets if you are getting high value targets down the field and you have a lot of chances to score touchdowns. But this offense isn't generating a lot of those for their wide receivers, and Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley are just so good in the red zone that the wide receivers also don't need to get super involved in the red zone. And then you have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, right, in that offense who are catching balls. But then you also have Saquon, who's getting a decent target share. You also have Goddard, when he's not hurt, getting a decent target share. And now you also have Jahan Dotson actually making some sort of impact on this offense. And so now there are honestly more mouths to feed. And so people were looking back at the 2024 season. A.J. Brown had a decent fantasy points per game at the end of the season of like 17 or 18 points per game. Devontae Smith, he did pretty good. He had over 15 points per game last year. But whenever you go back and you look at the splits, when everyone was healthy in this offense, because Goddard, Smith, and A.J. Brown, I believe, all missed a decent portion of the season with injuries last year, that is when these pass catchers were actually producing. At the same time, there is just such a huge range of the outcomes available where not much changes. There is still very limited passing volume, and Smith and Brown just are not producing, right? They just don't produce for fantasy. And that is really unfortunate because these are two very highly drafted guys and guys that are generally going to competing teams because you assume, right, that they are players who are going to produce, and they are both, not incredibly young players. And so the teams that have them are competing teams. They're likely not going to, the Eagles as a team likely aren't going to change a ton this year or next year. Their defense and Saquon and Jalen Hurts all look like they're in town to stay. And so while there's upside for these players, and if this happens and that happens, absolutely, they could have much more fantasy production. There is just also a big risk that you're a competitive team and neither of them really does much for you for the next 2 years. And now your competitive window is over, and you can't sell them for what you want to because they haven't produced in 2 years, and they're both now older and falling off the age cliff even more. And so they still have just a ton of name value. There was a lot of hype around both of them in the off season, with all these different possibilities for upside. They're both good players. They're advanced analytics, this and that. And so I think that there is still a window to sell. I think that if Brown and Smith have like 2 or 3 more weeks where they just don't do anything like significant for your fantasy team, then even if they do have like a boom week, people aren't going to trust it and it's not going to do anything for you. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the content, feel free to like and subscribe.